History has a strange way of choosing its heroes. In the world of country music, we celebrate rebels like Johnny Cash, angels like Patsy Cline, and master storytellers like Hank Williams. Their names are etched in stone, but history also has its ghost, giant voices who once shook the foundations of the Grand Ole Opry, but whose names are now barely a whisper. Today we're going to look for one of those ghosts, Texas Ruby. She was a force of nature, a woman with the voice of a Texas hurricane who stood alongside the greatest. So why was her legacy buried in the ashes of a quiet tragedy? This is more than a sad story. It's an investigation into the fragility of fame and an attempt to give a voice back to one of our forgotten legends. To truly understand Texas Ruby, you have to travel back in time to the world that forged her. She was born Ruby Agnes Owens in 1908 in Wise County, a patch of rural North Texas where the Cross Timbers region begins to soften into rolling prairie. This wasn't the Texas of myth and legend. This was hardscrabble country, a land of dirt farmers, coal miners, and devout Baptists, where life was governed by the punishing cycle of the seasons and the unforgiving sun. In the early 20th century, life here was a daily negotiation with hardship. Families lived in small, unpainted farmhouses, drawing water from a well and reading by the light of a kerosene lamp. Music in this world wasn't a luxury. It was a fundamental part of the human experience, as essential as bread and water. It was the rhythm of work in the cotton fields, the joyous noise of a Saturday night barn dance, the solemn harmony of a Sunday morning hymn. It was the glue that held communities together, a balm for the soul in a life that offered few other comforts. Ruby grew up in a house that was saturated with it. The Owens clan was a musical dynasty in its own right. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was their inheritance, a gift passed down through generations. Her father was a fiddler, her mother a singer. Her brothers, who would later find their own considerable fame as Tex Owens and Stonewall Owens, learned to play and sing almost as soon as they could walk. For young Ruby, singing wasn't a choice. It was an instinct, a natural expression of who she was. But even as a child, while other girls her age sang in the high, sweet, reedy sopranos typical of the era, Ruby's voice was something else entirely. It was big, deep, and resonant, a force of nature that seemed to come from the very Texas earth she stood on. It was a true contralto, a vocal range so rare it was almost unheard of in folk and country music. As Ruby was coming of age, the world outside Wise County was being fundamentally reshaped by a new and magical invention, the radio. Before radio, music was a local affair. A song could only travel as far as the singer's voice could carry. But now, with the twist of a glowing dial, voices and melodies could be plucked from the very air, traveling hundreds, even thousands of a mile in an instant. For a generation of poor rural musicians, radio was a miracle. It was a democratic medium that bypassed the established cultural gatekeepers, a direct line from the front porch to the nation's living rooms. It offered a tantalizing possibility, a chance to be heard, and perhaps a chance to escape the predetermined cycle of poverty and farm labor. As the Great Depression descended in the 1930s, tightening its grip on the nation and turning the Texas plains into a dust bowl, radio became more than just entertainment. It was a lifeline. It was free, it was communal, and it offered a desperately needed escape. Families would gather around their prize cabinet radios, listening to the wildly popular barn dance programs that beamed out from powerful stations across the country. From the WLS National Barn Dance in Chicago to the WWVA Jamboree in Wheeling, West Virginia, these shows created a new kind of stardom. They made heroes out of fiddle players, yodeling cowboys and gospel quartets, transforming regional folk music into a national phenomenon that would soon be called country. It was this world, a world of profound hardship and improbable hope, of old traditions and new technology, that Texas Ruby was about to step into. It was a world that was waiting, though it didn't know it yet, for a voice exactly like hers. Ruby's journey from a Texas farm girl to a Nashville star was not an overnight success. It was a winding road, a classic American story of paying dues, one dusty town and one small-time radio station at a time. Her first real break came not in Texas, but in the bustling, wide-open hub of Kansas City. She joined her brother Tex, who had already made a name for himself as a popular radio personality. It was Tex, in fact, who would go on to write one of the most iconic songs in the Western canon, Cattle Call, a tune made famous by Eddie Arnold. The sheer depth of talent in the Owens family was remarkable. In Kansas City, Ruby began performing regularly on KMBC, a powerhouse radio station whose signal could be heard across the Midwest. It was here, in the smoky, jazz-infused atmosphere of 1930s Kansas City, that Ruby Agnes Owens began to fully transform into Texas Ruby. The name was perfect. It was bold, memorable, and it captured the essence of her roots, her larger-than-life personality, and the raw, untamed quality of her voice. Kansas City was a crossroads of American music, a city where the blues, jazz, and Western swing all collided. This environment undoubtedly had a profound effect on Ruby, adding a new layer of bluesy sophistication and soulful grit to her sound. Radio audiences had simply never heard a woman sing like her. In an era where the ideal female vocalist was someone like a member of the Carter family, singing in a high, clear, almost fragile soprano, Ruby's voice was a shock to the system. It was a deep, powerful, and incredibly flexible instrument. She could deliver a sentimental ballad with heart-wrenching tenderness, then turn around and belt out a blues number with a growl that could peel paint. And then there was her yodel. Unlike the light, acrobatic yodels of singers like Patsy Montana, Ruby's yodel was a full-throated, blues-inflected cry that seemed to well up from the depths of her soul. She didn't just sing a song, she inhabited it, wrestled with it, and bent it to her will. She sang with the authority of a gospel preacher and the lived-in heartache of a sinner, and people were utterly captivated. In 1937, while working on a radio show in Fort Worth, her path fatefully crossed with a man named Staley Fox, known to the world as Curly. Curly was everything Ruby wasn't. He was a small, wiry, impossibly energetic fiddle player from Graysville, Tennessee, a born showman with a mischievous grin and feet that never seemed to stop moving. He was a virtuoso musician, a student of the legendary fiddler Clayton McMitchen, but his fame rested on his incredible showmanship. He was the king of trick fiddling, a dazzling vaudeville-inspired display where he'd play the fiddle behind his back, under his leg, or while dancing a furious jig, all without missing a note. His signature piece, the one that audiences screamed for, was called the Fox Chase. It was an astonishing feat of mimicry and technique, a musical narrative in which he used his fiddle to imitate the sounds of a pack of hounds chasing a fox through the woods, complete with yelps, barks, howls, and the frantic flight of the fox, all coaxed from his four-stringed instrument. When the deep, soulful, anchor-like voice of Texas, Ruby met the fiery, acrobatic, lightning-in-a-bottle fiddle of Curly Fox, something magical happened. It was the perfect, unexpected combination of profound heart and dazzling flash, of deep substance and brilliant style. They weren't just a musical duo, they were a complete and total entertainment package. The personal chemistry was just as immediate. They married 2 years later in 1939, forging a partnership that would become one of the most beloved and enduring acts in country music. Together they hit the road, barnstorming across the country. They were true road warriors, playing everywhere from small-town vaudeville theaters and smoky honky-tonks to major radio stations. They honed their act, building a dynamic that was irresistible. On stage, Ruby was the undisputed center of gravity. She stood tall and regal, often in her signature tailored slacks, a commanding presence who held the audience in the palm of her hand from the moment she sang her first note. Curly was the whirlwind, a kinetic force of nature who danced and spun around her, his fiddle a blur of motion. The visual contrast was as compelling as the musical one. The big, stately woman with the booming, soulful voice, and the small, energetic man who made his fiddle sing, shout, and laugh. Their shared dream, like that of nearly every country performer of the era, was the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. The Opry wasn't just a radio show. It was the mother church of country music, the ultimate validation of a performer's talent and appeal. To be invited to become a member of the Opry was to have truly arrived. In 1944, they got the call. Ruby and Curly joined the cast of the Opry, and for the next 4 years, they were among its brightest and most popular stars. Every Saturday night, their sound crackled out of radios across America, broadcast live from the stage of the iconic Ryman Auditorium. They became known for songs like the powerfully defiant "Don't Let That Man Get You Down," the playful, winking "Ain't You Ashamed," and the heartbreaking ballad "I'll Never Shed Another Tear." They were at the absolute pinnacle of their profession, country music royalty. And then, in 1948, at the very height of their fame, they did something that stunned the Nashville establishment. They quit the Grand Ole Opry. This is one of the lesser discussed and more revealing chapters of their story. There was no public feud, no grand controversy. They simply walked away from the biggest stage in the business. The grueling Opry lifestyle was certainly a factor. Being an Opry star in the 1940s meant a relentless schedule. There was the Saturday night broadcast, of course, but the real money was made during the week, on punishing tent shows and package tours booked by the Opry's management arm, the WSM Artist Service. Performers were often packed into cars, driving hundreds of miles a day to play in school gymnasiums and dusty fairgrounds for a small slice of the gate. The pay for the Opry broadcast itself was little more than union scale, a few dollars. The Opry sold the performers fame, and the performers had to monetize it through constant, exhausting touring. Ruby and Curly, fiercely independent, may have simply done the math and decided they could do better on their own. They wanted more control over their schedule, their finances, and their lives. Leaving the Opry was a huge gamble, a deliberate step away from the brightest spotlight in their world. But it was a choice they made together. They moved to Houston, Texas, where they became pioneers in the new and exciting medium of television, hosting their own popular show for several years. They continued to record and tour, but now it was on their own terms. In the late 1950s, they decided to move back to the Nashville area, not to rejoin the Opry, but simply to be near the heart of the music community they loved. They bought a small plot of land, and instead of building the grand house their fame could have afforded, they settled into a modest mobile home. It was a quiet, unassuming life for a couple who had once been royalty on the Ryman stage. It was in that simple trailer that they planned to grow old, making music and living life together. To truly understand the immensity of the tragedy that befell Texas Ruby, one must first grasp the profound depth of the life and the love that was lost. The partnership between Ruby and Curly was far more than a professional arrangement or a stage act. It was a decades-long love story that played out in the glare of the spotlight and in the quiet, unobserved moments between shows. On stage, their chemistry was a tangible thing. Ruby was the solid, unshakable center, the emotional core of every performance. Her voice was an instrument of astonishing power and nuance. One contemporary journalist described it aptly as a big, warm blanket of a voice, a sound that could simultaneously comfort you and shake you to your very core. She was a physically large woman in an era that prized petite femininity, but she carried her size not as a burden, but as a source of power. She stood with an unshakable confidence that was utterly captivating and exceedingly rare for female performers of her day. She didn't try to fit into a pre-made mold. She created her own. This quiet confidence was most evident in her simple yet revolutionary choice of attire. In the deeply conservative, image-conscious world of the 1940s, Grand Ole Opry, where women were expected to wear wholesome gingham dresses and project an image of rural domesticity, Texas Ruby frequently walked on stage wearing elegantly tailored slacks. It was a visual declaration that she was a serious artist, not just a decorative girl singer. She was there to work, to sing her heart out, and she was going to be comfortable and professional while she did it. It was a subtle act of defiance that chipped away at the rigid expectations for women in entertainment, paving the way for the female artists who would follow. Curly, in contrast, was the kinetic energy, the dazzling firefly to her steady flame. He was the consummate showman, but his act was always in service of their partnership. He would orbit her on stage, his flamboyant fiddling a perfect energetic counterpoint to her grounded, soulful presence. Eyewitness accounts from their Opry days paint a picture of a man utterly devoted to, and in awe of, his wife. Between songs, during the applause, he would instinctively look to her for a nod of approval, his frenetic energy calming the moment she stepped to the microphone to sing. He was the lightning, and she unequivocally was the thunder. Off stage, their life was surprisingly simple. Despite their considerable fame and the success of their records and tours, they never amassed great wealth or pursued a lavish lifestyle. The decision to live in a trailer home, even when they could have afforded much more, spoke volumes about their values. They weren't interested in the trappings of stardom. They were, at heart, road people who had spent the better part of their lives traveling from town to town. A mobile home wasn't a step down. It was a familiar comfort, a permanent, cozy version of the life they had always known. It was their sanctuary, their small private world, where they could simply be Ruby and Staley, not the larger-than-life personas of Texas Ruby and Curly Fox. Friends and fellow musicians from that era remembered Ruby as the undisputed heart of their home. She was, by all accounts, a phenomenal cook, known for her southern hospitality. Their modest trailer was often filled with the rich aroma of home-cooked meals and the sound of easy laughter as they entertained friends from the music business. She was widely seen as a maternal figure, warm, funny, and deeply grounded, a stark contrast to the powerhouse performer who could silence a rowdy auditorium with a single note. Curly, for all his on-stage bravado and showmanship, was utterly and completely devoted to her. She was his rock, his business manager, his confidant, his partner in every conceivable sense of the word. A rarely told story passed down by fellow musicians perfectly illustrates their dynamic. Early in their career, they played a show for an unscrupulous promoter who, at the end of the night, tried to cheat them out of a significant portion of their pay. The small, wiry Curly was ready to fight, but the promoter and his friends were much larger men. Before things could escalate, Ruby, without raising her voice, simply stepped between them. She looked the promoter dead in the eye and with that calm, unshakable, and slightly intimidating presence she was famous for, told him that he would pay them exactly what they were owed right now. There was no argument. He paid. She was his protector, his champion, his anchor. It was this deep, profoundly intertwined connection, this complete and total reliance on each other for everything, that made what was to come so utterly, unimaginably devastating. They had built a world for two, a world that couldn't possibly exist with only one. In the early morning hours of March 29, 1963, while Curly Fox was performing at the Grand Ole Opry, a fire broke out in their Nashville mobile home. Miss Texas Ruby was unable to escape and died in the blaze. The official cause was a faulty oil heater, but many sources and colleagues later speculated that she may have fallen asleep while smoking a cigarette. Their years-long relationship ended abruptly and painfully, leaving Curly Fox devastated. The news spread through the Opry with terrifying speed. The show, which prided itself on never stopping for anything, was shut down. Backstage, the performers were sobbing. Ernest Tubb, a legend and close friend of his, was too distraught to continue. The Ryman Auditorium, the mother church of country music, became a place of mourning. The tragedy was not just the loss of a beloved colleague. It was the brutal public breakup of a relationship that everyone admired. It felt like the heart of the Opry family had been ripped out. For Curly Fox, the aftermath was a long, dark descent into sadness. He became a recluse, a ghost haunting the life they had built together. The violin, once his source of joy and livelihood, was now a silent, aching relic. He dared not touch it, let alone play it. He resigned from the Grand Ole Opry and disappeared from public view, lost in a loss that had effectively silenced his music. The passing of Texas Ruby was not just a personal loss for Curly Fox, but a tragedy for the entire community. The reaction from fans showed how much she was loved and respected. Fans across the country expressed their deep grief. Not only did they lose a talented singer, but they also lost an icon of love and resilience in country music. Thousands of condolences poured in for Curly Fox, expressing their sympathy and respect for the artist who passed away. In memory of Texas Ruby, Columbia Records released the album Original Recordings of Texas Ruby and Curly Fox, a memorial tribute to Texas Ruby. This is a way to honor her contributions to country music and a gift to her fans to continue to hear her voice. Years later, he would find the strength to pick up his fiddle again, and he even remarried, but those close to him knew that the joyous, carefree Curly Fox of the Opry stage had died in the fire with his wife. He passed away in November 1995, his life forever defined by the music he made with Ruby and the tragedy that tore them apart. Texas. Ruby was more than just a country singer. She was an icon. Her musical life and love affair with Curly Fox were legendary, where the two talents blended together to create a beautiful symphony. Her powerful, soulful voice broke down barriers, affirming her place as a strong woman in the music world. Texas Ruby's legacy is not her tragic passing, but her vitality. The fire took her body, but not her soulful voice and her everlasting love story. When fans listen to old recordings, they not only hear a historic voice, but also feel the resilience, innovation, and love that fueled every note. Her voice is still there, a warm and eternal fire, a testament to a Texas woman with a never-ending spirit.